I use it whenever I'm brewing, and this isn't a very big neighborhood. There's 125 units in here, and whenever the flag goes up, the neighborhood knows I'm brewing. This is called J&S Underground Brewing. J&S for John and Sandy, and underground because I really started doing this in the basement. I'm underground, and I thought it would be very wise to add my wife's initials in there and keep her as involved as possible because you have to have a very tolerant wife if you're going to homebrew. My wife and I have been living in a cottage, and I was brewing in the basement for a number of years, and she knew this was what I wanted to do, my hobby. So I didn't really have any problem convincing her that when we got a house, we needed a house with room for brewing. When we saw this house, the basement was just full of crap, but I could see the potential here. It was so big that if I take just a third of this basement and the way the water pipes were set and the drain pipes, so I could build a brewery down here. The process of brewing really takes multiple steps. I always argue with my son-in-law, it is the most complicated beverage to make, much more complicated than wine. Wine involves growing grapes, and the grapes have to be grown properly, and it's agriculture. This is more like cooking. You get your malt, barley I should say. The barley is malted. There's a number of ways of malting barley, and you get different types of malt by how much you roast it. And it goes from a very light roast, like a Pilsner, to a very dark roast. Then what we do is we add water to it, which is where we jump in here. We add water to it at certain temperatures. The temperatures will activate enzymes, and the enzymes will, in our case, first work on some of the proteins there to break them down. And then when we bring it up around the 152 range, it's going to break down many of the starches that are present in the grain into sugars. And you do that for about an hour. You drain it out. The liquid now is full of sugar and all the flavors from the malt. At that point, you add your yeast. The yeast does its magic, and within a few weeks, you wind up with beer. I'm going to say probably back around late 70s, maybe early 80s, I ran into somebody I knew from high school. He was brewing his own, and I asked him how good it was, and he told me, you can brew better beer than anything you can buy out there today. And for the time, he was absolutely right. At that time, the only way you could find a kit or anything, you had to find a magazine. So I picked up a Popular Mechanics, and there was a little ad, and I cut it out, and I saved that till I was ready, and then I wrote to them or called them, I forget, and they sent me a booklet, and I ordered from their catalog, and I got my first batch of homebrewing equipment, which was a plastic bucket, some tubing, an airlock. There wasn't much to it. And you got a kit, which was some syrup instead of the grain. It was very simple. And it made beer. And honestly, it was pretty good. It was better than drinking Budweiser, what was out there. And it was pretty crude by today's standards, but for the time, it was the beginning of craft beer. I have to get my grain and measure out the grain, crush the grain, get my water. I'm kind of compulsive about or obsessive about my water. I use usually Saratoga spring water, and then I will dilute it, usually with distilled water, and then add the minerals that I want to reach a certain mineral profile. I think a common misconception for people who don't homebrew is that homebrew sucks. And a lot of it does, let's face it. You look at the German and the English breweries and the Czech breweries and the ones who've been around for generations. It's been, if not decades, hundreds of years sometimes for them to perfect it. And it's usually one or two beers that they have. All craft brewers are trying to make 7 or 8 beers and make them all well, and they usually fail. So particularly with home brewers, I think there's a misconception. It's like, oh, Jesus, it's going to be awful. And they're not. Sometimes they can surprise you. There's a pump here. The pump takes it out, brings it through, monitors the temperature. And as the heat increases or decreases, this thing will monitor it and change the amount of heat going into the liquid. So this is the J&S Underground Brewing Kegerator. I came up with this idea, put it down here, and we have a wet bar above us. Run our lines up and into the wet bar. The cold air blows up from the kegerator all the way up into the beer tower on the next floor, and then comes back down, and that keeps the beer cold. All right, so this is the other half of the kegerator wet bar setup. Cut a hole down here, ran that tube up, connected it to here, and at this point we have these beautiful tap handles. My son bought me this, and we get beer. In general, when I brew a beer, I brew it for me. I know it's a good beer if my wife starts drinking it. If I see her having a sample now and then, I know it's pretty good. Otherwise, if it comes out pretty good, I'll send them into competition. I try and send in a couple every year, and so far since I started All Grain Brewing, I've won the first, second, or third in category at least once a year. But it's primarily for myself, and then I tell my neighbors I'm like the guy who grows zucchini in the backyard. You wake up in the morning, there's a basket of zucchini on your front door, whether you want it or not. I make the beer, I put it in bottles, and then I put it on their front door, and they come home, and then they have to tell me they like it, whether they do or not. I thought about selling my beer. I thought about it, let's put it that way. It went through my head. I was retiring. I had time. The thing was, I did not want to be another one of those people who were putting out crappy beers. There's enough of them out there. And I wanted to have something really good before I even considered it. I also thought we were heading for another bust. Like the early 90s when craft beers started booming and then all of a sudden disappeared, well, the brew pubs anyway. I felt that, there's so many breweries out there, how much can the market hold? Well, it's 10 years later and it's still growing, so I was way off base with that. But regardless, I'm very happy homebrewing. Even if I knew the market was going to be what it is today, I still wouldn't have done it. I'm a home brewer. It's what I like to do. I like to do it for myself. I don't particularly want to be a businessman. So I'm in a good place. It's my world down here. It's sort of like my man cave. I'm a gadget guy. I like the gadgets. I like beer. I do enjoy cooking as well. I like science, and it all comes together in home brewing. So it's kind of a fun thing. And I moved into this neighborhood 2.5 years ago, and of course it's an older generation here. But I was on the fire department for 31 years in New York City, and you would think I'm a retired fireman, and I'm not. In this neighborhood, I'm the guy who brews beer. That's kind of how I'm known. So it's just kind of fun.